Okay, so are we on again?
Yeah.
So what happened was then they were worried about my exposure. I mean, I'd been quite exposed in pushing this military issue, and I mean, the way things worked then, it wasn't very nice. I mean, we had this conflict within NewSAS, and so things worked in caucuses. So we had this caucus. I mean, people like Janet and Brett and myself were part of the same caucus, and my brother Michael and Chris Giffard, and there were various other people. Several of them ended up in jail for periods and so on. But Max Zazinski was another. And then there was a caucus on the other side and there was this big debate going on. But the debate was quite exposing. I took the front position in that debate, and we used to, you know, it sounds horrible now, but we used to sort of strategize it so that I would go in hard and somebody else would go in softer, and you know, that kind of thing. Anyway, I was quite exposed by that, and the situation with the pamphlets as well, and the ANC got worried about my security. So then the idea came up for me to move to Johannesburg, and they thought this was a good idea. They were also aware of the tensions within the unit that I was working in, and so I then moved up to Johannesburg at that stage. And the idea was that I would go and push this military issue there, but in a much quieter way. So at that stage, ECC was in the state of formation. I mean, what happened was ANC wanted us to push this issue. So we pushed it within NewSAS, and then fortuitously a range of new objectors came, conscientious objectors who were political people came. And there were several of them. There's a guy called Pete Hawthorne, and there were a few others who came forward, and they were prepared to take a directly political stand. Some of them weren't Christian at all, and so we were then demonstrating in a way within NewSAS that it was possible to object to the army and not on a left-wing political kind of basis of support for the Freedom Charter and so on. And they would get it. They got sentences of up to 2 years in prison, which in a way that was the end of it for them. I mean, they didn't have 2 years of camps after that. Prison pretty tough, obviously, but they survived. So there were a few of those objectives, and we ran big campaigns around those objectives, and big campaigns around opposing the military, and because Angola at that stage, and what they were doing there in Namibia, and got a high profile for this issue, and there was now a steady stream of objectives who were coming forward, because the one would encourage the next one to come along, and so on. So there was a big thing going on. This was 1982. What happened then was that we decided we needed a much broader campaign against the military. And so Brett Myrdal was then going to object, and he was going to go in for 2 years. And he was set up for that. He had made his, he had gone up to the, because you had to go and declare yourself, and he had done that.
You had met Brett at UCT?
Yeah, actually we were at school together.
Okay.
So we were in the same class at school, in PE, and but we were also involved in the same kinds of things as at university. So Brett was going to. He had already objected, and then he was charged, and he was going on trial, and then they delayed his trial because new legislation came in, and they increased the period for objection for going from 2 years to 8 years. Then they changed it back. Then for some reason they changed it to 6. So it went 2 years to 8 years, and then to 6. So Brett was actually prepared to go into jail for that period, but we, who support group, we said no. And then he went to check it up, because by then he was in the ANC, to ask what they said, and they said no. That takes you out for 8 years. Well, we thought it was 8 at that stage. And you can do much more good by going into, by leaving the country. Don't do it. And and he then went and caucused it also with community leaders. By then, UDF was soon to be launched. This beginning of 1983, end of 82, beginning of 83. There was a lot of momentum. So there were a lot of key people like Terry Lakota, they had come out of jail, Murphy Marobe, people like that. He went and spoke to those sorts of people, and all of them unanimously said, don't go to jail. And he was actually wanted to go to jail. He thought he didn't, but eventually it was like unanimous. Brett, you're not going to jail. So he then went into exile. But before he did that, by then he'd been going around the country, and what he had done was push this idea of a broader campaign against the military. And then fortuitously, Black Sash came out with a motion opposing the law on conscription. And so we thought this is a brilliant thing to pick up, was that you can have a very broad-based campaign against the law. And you know, you weren't allowed to, you would get jailed if you, I think for a period of 6 years, if you encouraged anyone to refuse to do military service. But there was nothing stopping you from encouraging a change in the law. You were allowed to do that. In that way, South Africa, if I look back now, South Africa was very different from a place like North Korea or Chile under Pinochet or Burma now. You know, there was room to maneuver because it was there was a parliamentary democracy, and there were certain things in place that allowed you, that gave you a bit of space. And change, one of them was this idea of a change in the law. So